Free improvisation. Free improvisation or free music is improvised music without any rules beyond the logic or inclination of the musicians involved. The term can refer to both a technique employed by any musician in any genre and as a recognizable genre in its own right. Free improvisation, as a genre of music, developed in the US and Europe in the mid to late 1960s, largely as an outgrowth of free jazz and modern classical musics. Exponents of free improvised music include saxophonists Evan Parker, Anthony Braxton, Peter Brötzmann, and John Zorn, composer Pauline Oliveros, drummer Christian Lillinger, trombonist George E. Lewis, guitarists Derek Bailey, Henry Kaiser and Fred Frith, and the improvising group's Spontaneous Music Ensemble. The music characteristics. In an atonal context, free improvisation refers to where the focus shifts from harmony to other dimensions of music, timbre, melodic intervals, rhythm, and the spontaneous interaction between musicians. Although performers may choose to play in a certain style or key, or at a certain tempo, conventional songs are highly uncommon in free improvisation. More emphasis is generally placed on mood, texture, or more simply, on performative gesture than on preset forms of melody, harmony, or rhythm. These elements are improvised at will as the music progresses. John Iles notes that guitarist Derek Bailey has been quoted as saying that free improvisation is playing without memory. In his landmark book Improvisation, Bailey writes, "The lack of precision over its free improv's naming is, if anything, increased. When we come to the thing itself, diversity is its most consistent characteristic." For example, acclaimed soundtrack composer Ennio Morricone was a member of the free improvisation group Nuova Consonanza. Anthony Braxton has written opera, and John Zorn has written acclaimed orchestral pieces. As it has influenced and been influenced by other areas of exploration, aspects of modern classical music, extended techniques, noise rock, aggressive confrontation and dissonance, IDM, computer manipulation and digital synthesis, minimalism, and electrocaustic music can now be heard in free improvisation. History. Though there are many important precedents and developments, free improvisation developed gradually, making it difficult to pinpoint a single moment when the style was born. However, its lineage is linked to Afro-American music, particularly the experiments made in the 1960s commonly known as free jazz. The musical advancements made through improvisation through free jazz served as inspiration to European musicians, who then created free improvisation as a differentiation. British guitarist Derek Bailey contends that free improvisation must have been the earliest musical style because mankind's first musical performance couldn't have been anything other than a free improvisation. Similarly, Keith Rose stated other players got into playing freely way before way before Derek Bailey. Who knows when free playing started? You can imagine lute players in the 1500s getting drunk and doing improvisations for people in front of a log fire. The noise, the clatter must have been enormous. You read absolutely incredible descriptions of that. It is neither free nor improvised as in their strict definitions. Musicians who play free improvisation develop highly individualized musical vocabulary which are then played without the restriction of a score. In this sense, the freedom implied by the term free improvisation is more of an aesthetic of playing towards notions of freedom than freedom in the pure sense. Classical precedence. By the middle decades of the 20th century, composers like Henry Cowell, Earl Brown, David Tudor, Lamonti Young, Jackson Maclow, Morton Feldman, Silvano Bassotti, Karl Heinz Stockhausen, and George Crumb reintroduced improvisation to European art music with compositions that allowed or even required musicians to improvise. One notable example of this is Cornelius Cardew's treatise, a graphic score with no conventional notation whatsoever, which musicians were invited to interpret. Improvisation is still commonly practiced by some organists at concerts or church services, and courses in improvisation, including free improvisation, are part of many higher education programs for church musicians. Notable contemporary organists include Olivier Latry and Jean Guillou. Free improvisations for organ has also occasionally been recorded and released on albums, such as Like a Flame by Frederick Magel. Jazz precedence. Improvisation has been a central element of jazz since the music's inception, but until the 1950s, such improvisation was typically clearly within the jazz idiom and based on prescribed traditions. Perhaps the earliest free recordings in jazz are two pieces recorded under the leadership of jazz pianist Lenny Tristano, Intuition and Digression, both recorded in 1949 with a quintet including saxophone players Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh. In 1954, Shelly Manne recorded a piece called Abstract No. 1 with trumpeter Shorty Rogers and reedsmith Jimmy Joffer, which was freely improvised. Jazz critic Harvey Pekar has also pointed out that one of Django Reinhardt's recorded improvisations strays drastically from the chord changes of the established piece. While noteworthy, these examples were clearly in the jazz idiom. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the free jazz movement coalesced around such important and disparate figures as Cecil Taylor, Sun Ra Ornette Coleman, and John Coltrane, as well as many lesser-known figures such as Joe Mannery and Joe Harriott. Free jazz allowed for radical improvised departures from the harmonic and rhythmic material of the composition, for instance, by permitting performers to ignore conventional repeating song structures. Such music often seemed far removed from the preceding jazz tradition, even though it almost always preserved one or more central elements of that tradition while abandoning others. These ideas were extended in the 1962 Free Fall recording by jazz clarinetist Jimmy Jeffries Trio, featuring music that was often freely and spontaneously improvised, and which had only tenuous similarity to established jazz styles. Another important recording was New York Eye and Ear Control 1964, a soundtrack for a film by Michael Snow, recorded for the ESP disc label under the leadership of saxophonist Albert Ayler. Snow suggested to Ayler that the band simply play without a composition or themes. The Spontaneous Music Ensemble was formed by John Stevens and Trevor Watts in the mid-1960s and included, at various times, influential players such as Derek Bailey, Evan Parker, Kenny Wheeler, Roger Smith, and John Butcher. As with the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians (ACM), many of these players began in jazz but gradually pushed the music into a zone of abstraction and relative quietude. The British record label Imaginem has documented much music in this vein. There was and continues to be often considerable blurring of the line between free jazz and free improvisation. The Chicago-based ACM, a loose collective of improvising musicians including Newhall Richard Abrams, Henry Threadgill, Anthony Braxton, Jack DeJohnette, Lester Bowie, Roscoe Mitchell, Joseph Jarman, Famadou Don Moy, Malachi Favors, and George E. Louis, was formed in 1965 and included many of the key players in. Braxton recorded many times with Bailey and Teitelbaum. Mitchell recorded with Thomas Buckner and Pauline Oliveros. In 1966, Elektra Records issued the first recording of European free improvisation by the UK group AMM, which included at the time Cornelius Cardew, Eddie Provost, Lou Gare, Keith Rowe, and Lawrence Sheaf. In 1967, classical strings-focused Just Music had been formed by Alfred Harth and been recorded on ECM 1002 in 1969 in West Germany. International free improvisation. Through the remainder of the 1960s and through the 1970s, free improvisation spread across the US, Europe, and East Asia, entering quickly into a dialogue with Fluxus happenings, performance art, and rock music. By the mid-1970s, free improvisation was truly a worldwide phenomenon. In 1976, Derek Bailey founded and curated Company Week, the first of an annual series of improvised music festivals in which Bailey programmed performances by ad hoc ensembles of musicians who in many cases had never played with each other before. This musical chair's approach to collaboration was a characteristically provocative gesture, by Bailey, perhaps in response to John Stevens' claim that musicians needed to collaborate for months or years in order to improvise well together. The final company week was in 1994. Since 2002, New Zealand collective Vitamin S has hosted weekly improvisations based around randomly drawn trios. Vitamin S takes the form beyond music and includes improvisers from other forms such as dance, theater, and puppetry. Since 2006, improvisational music in many forms has been supported and promoted by ISM, the International Society for Improvised Music, founded by Ed Sarath of the University of Michigan and Sarah Weaver. ISM comprises some 300 performing artists and scholars worldwide, including Pauline Oliveros, Oliver Lake, Thomas Buckner, Robert Dick, India Cook, Jane Ira Bloom, Carlton Hester, Roman Stollier, Mark Dresser, and many others. Founded in Manchester, England in 2007, the Noise Upstairs has been an institution dedicated to the practice of improvised music, hosting regular concerts and creative workshops where they have promoted international and UK-based artists such as Ken Vander Mark. On top of these events, the Noise Upstairs runs monthly jam nights, the premise being that anyone can turn up and join in by putting their name in the hat, and trios are chosen at random to freely improvise together. These jam sessions also include a set from special guests, which have included many international musicians such as Jason Kahn, Sonia Paco Rakiet, Daniel Leda, Helmut Lemke, and Christine Sainiayu, as well as top UK improvisers Mick Beck, Phil Marks, Pete Fairclough, Shatner's bassoon, Anton Hunter, Rodrigo Constanzo, John. Other groups, such as the 1984 Ensemble, which was formed in 2013 by trombonist Chris T. Reeder in Oxford, featuring musicians from the Oxford Improvisers, have expanded free improvisation using live electronic and acoustic instruments with computers. A downtown scene. In late 1970s New York, a group of musicians came together who shared an interest in free improvisation, as well as rock, jazz, contemporary classical, world music, and pop. They performed at lofts, apartments, basements, and venues located predominantly in downtown New York: 8BC, Pyramid Club, Environ, Roulette, Studio Henry, Someplace Nice, The Saint, King Tut's Wahat, and later the Knitting Factory and Tonic, and held regular concerts of free improvisation, which featured many of the prominent figures in the scene. They worked with each other independently and with many of the leading European improvisers of the time, including Derek Bailey, Evan Parker, Han Benink, Misha Mengelberg, Peter Brötzmann, and others. Many of these musicians continue to use improvisation in one form or another in their work. In the tradition of Derek Bailey's Company Week, monthly improv nights have become a tradition at John Zorn's East Village performance space, The Stone. Organized as benefits to raise the expenses needed to keep the venue operational, these concerts of improvised music have featured hundreds of musicians from a variety of backgrounds, generations, and traditions. Electronic free improvisation. Electronic devices such as oscillators, echoes, filters, and alarm clocks were an integral part of free improvisation performances by groups such as Cluster at the underground scene at Zodiac Club in Berlin in the late 1960s. For the 1975 jazz rock concert recording Aghata, Miles Davis and his band employed free improvisation and electronics, particularly guitarist Pete Cosey, who improvised sounds by running his guitar through a ring modulator and an EMS synth IA, but it was only later that traditional instruments were disbanded altogether in favor of pure electronic. In 1984, the Swiss improvisation duo Voice Crack started making use of strictly cracked everyday electronics. More recently, electronic free improvisation has drawn on circuit bending, noise music, DIY culture, and turntablism, represented by performers such as Atomo Yashahide, Hemalik Tempo, Gunter Muller, Korzi, and many others. Electrocaustic improvisation. A recent branch of improvised music is characterized by quiet, slow-moving, minimalistic textures and often utilizing laptop computers or unorthodox forms of electronics. Developing worldwide in the mid to late 1990s, with centers in New York, Tokyo, and Austria, this style has been called lowercase music or EAI electrocaustic improvisation, and is represented, for instance, by the American record label Erstwhile Records and the Austrian label Migo. EAI is often radically different even from established free improvisation. Iles writes, "One of the problems of describing this music is that it requires a new vocabulary and ways of conveying its sound and impact. Such vocabulary does not yet exist. How do you describe the subtle differences between different types of controlled feedback? I've yet to see anyone do it convincingly, hence the use of words like shape and texture." Free improvisation on the radio. A London-based independent radio station, Resonance 104.4 FM, founded by the London Musicians Collective, frequently broadcasts experimental and free improvised performance works. WNR 89.3 FM, Chicago's Sound Experiment, is another source for free improvised music on the radio. Taryn's Free Jazz Hour broadcast on Radio G 101.5 FM, Angers and Radio 101.3 FM Dance, is entirely dedicated to free jazz and other freely improvised music. L'Improviste, France Musique French Radio. Listen online the last 4 broadcasts, only free music every week by Anne Montarin. Based in the neighboring town of Newton, Boston is served with a good amount of free improvisation music from Boston College's non-commercial radio station, 90.3 FM WZBC, as part of its vast number of experimental programs.